Good morning, everyone. This is the second of the App Protocol Dev Tech Talks. My name is Boris Mann, and we are hosting Nick Jerikine's talking about Smoke Signal built on top of App Protocol. And I think we're also going to get into blue badges that he's also built and a few hot takes on various things. So I'm really looking forward to this. Welcome, Nick. And did I even get close to pronouncing your last name correctly?
Yeah, it's Jerikinis. So that was pretty.
Nope.
It's like 10% away.
Okay.
Great.
Give me a second here and I will share your presentation. Is not in my scroll back. Give me a second here. That's that. There we are. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Perfect.
That's great.
Good stuff. And Nick, just say next slide and I can advance to the next one whenever you need it.
Sounds good. Okay, so this is going to be a talk about Smoke Signal. And the sort of TLDR is that it's going to be events, RSVPs, and data ownership. If you've not gone to the site, we'll have some screenshots. There's my name, Nick Jerikinis. My handle is njerikinis.me, which is also my website, and then my email address. So I'm going to send out these slides, or at least make them available afterward, probably through Boris, actually. There's nothing confidential or incriminating on them, so all good to share. If you could next. Cool. So my name is Nick. Ironically, coincidentally, I'm wearing the same shirt that's from this picture. I'm Caucasian dude. I've got a big bushy mustache. I did have blue hair at one point, but it's brown now and mostly gray. And that's okay. I'm a software developer, author, and technology enthusiast in Dayton, Ohio. I'm actually born and raised in Nolens, lived out in California for a while, moved to Ohio a little over 10 years ago. And I've been working remotely in the video game, backend, and sort of internet space for quite a while. If you want to hit next. So I don't normally do this, but I think it's important to note Smoke Signal borrows from language and concepts that originate from indigenous people. I live in Ohio, where the Miami tribes and the Shawnee tribes, Shawnee people, I should say, were displaced. Colonialism is a real thing, and it affects us all, whether we like it or not. So simple acknowledgement. I think it's important to note. Get it next. Also, all opinions here are my own. Smoke Signal is a passion project, and it is not endorsed by employers past or present. I am a senior software engineer for GitHub, Microsoft, and I like my job. So if you also like me building fun things and would like to help retain my employment, go use GitHub Copilot for dollars, and that's great. Okay, next. Cool. So what is Smoke Signal? Next. The TLDR. Create and manage events and event RSVPs. Really, the goal of Smoke Signal is it's an event management system, and it's some CRUD on top of the foundation that App Protocol builds and creates, right? The goal is to create a social utility that helps people connect. It's to provide a stable lexicon. While also owning as little data as possible, and then be architected for global distribution and designed for hyper-local usage, right? So we want to create an application that is able to cater and serve to all sorts of people across the world and across a lot of different interests, but still provide a user experience and tools to allow them to find things that usually matter, which are usually local things. It's a Rust application backed by SQLite. It's just HTML, Docker, and Caddy. There's really nothing super fancy. I am not a front-end engineer by trade, so my interfaces, as you can see, tend to be like black text on white background, sometimes with lists, mostly paragraphs, and I keep it simple. Next. If you've not seen Smoke Signal, this is what it looks like. Right off the bat, it shows you exactly what it does, which is it has events. There's lists of recent and upcoming events, a way to do some basic search, and then calls to action to log in and contribute. If you could go next. An event page is relatively straightforward. all of the elements are visually distinct. Above sort of the browser fold, immediately it says, what is the event? When does it occur? Who created it? How can I add this to my calendar? Or what relevant locations or addresses are available? And then the description of the event, describing the what, who, when, where, etc. And then of course the RSVPs down at the bottoms for people that are going, interested in going or not going. Next. So really, Smoke Signal is a simple application. There's not a whole lot to it. OAuth helps quite a bit with that. Originally, it was using app passwords, but moved to OAuth pretty quickly because it actually made my life a lot easier. It also dramatically lowered the barrier of entry to using the application. If you can hit next. This is the happy path. Me, user, I want to log into Smoke Signal, so I initiate the OAuth login process. I get redirected to the PDS. There's a callback, and then poof, I'm authenticated and I can do stuff. Tokens, both refresh tokens and access tokens are stored server-side encrypted, so they are recycled and reused as much as possible. We do refresh calls, and we do some manual token expiration, and I can get into a little bit of that later if you want. But the idea is that given that tokens are bound to keys, both DPoP keys and server secrets, those rotate every 30 to 60 days. So in theory, any sessions associated with them are going to pop out anyway. Next.
Nick,
yeah.
I'm going to try and disambiguate some acronyms. I heard you say DPoP.
Oh yeah. So part of the app protocol OAuth spec is this concept of proofs, like digital proofs of the any given request. So it's basically a DPoP. It's a way of ensuring the authenticity of a single request in the context of an access token, like a bearer token request. So the idea is that you sign a special structure that's verified and exchanged as part of the original authentication, like OAuth mechanism. So when you access a token, you're saying, hey, I'm also going to be using this special thing to sign any requests relevant to this chain of tokens from the access token through subsequent access tokens via refresh tokens. And it includes time relevant and contextual information. So like the request method, the URI, timestamp, a nonce, etc. And that allows the sort of entire life cycle of authenticated like API calls and requests, either API calls or OAuth requests, to be more trustworthy. Basically, it's harder to spoof and perform man-in-the-middle attacks, replay attacks, etc.
Awesome. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot, and I see Paul dropped a link in there as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Cool. Record management is also extremely simple. Next. When you want to create an event or RSVP to an event, you're performing the same action, which is you are just writing a record to the handles PDS. For a lot of users, there is, that information is just being stored on the blue sky mushrooms. How are we referring to those named servers? I don't actually know what the naming scheme for all those PDSs is. But for me, like I have my own PDS, pds.coda.cloud, and when I create records, that's stored locally. Mushroom servers, the microsphere, that's brilliant. I love it. That information is stored locally with me, and I'm going to keep that forever. In fact, I'll talk about how that was useful later when we talk about the roadmap and stuff in a bit. Next. Cool. The real important thing to note here is that Smoke Signal, it being an app protocol application, an app view, one could say, it actually has very little dependencies on the larger app protocol ecosystem. The only thing it really needs is a PLC for DID lookups, and there's a big old asterisk there because in theory, it doesn't need PLC with WebDids, and it needs a PDS to store and interact with data on. Smoke Signal could consume from the Firehose and support more complex event things, but it doesn't yet. And I think that's really important when we talk about data ownership and portability. And I'll get into a little bit more of that in a bit. I know I'm talking super fast and I'm blowing through these slides. If anyone does have other questions, feel free to like jump up. Next.
I'll actually, especially if this is a scary slide, I'll maybe put a pin in it for later. I know that I'm stumbling over, is it an app? Is Smoke Signal itself a protocol? Because it's lexicons and everything else like that. For simplicity, I've just been saying app. I wonder what you think about that or what others think about that, because it, like, who cares who cares about all the other lexicon shared stuff until we do?
Absolutely. Yeah, I had a slide in here, but I took it out because I didn't want to be snarky. But the text of it was to the effect of, is Smoke Signal an app view? Is it an app protocol application? Is it completely unrelated and just using OAuth and API calls? I don't know. And to some extent, it doesn't really matter to me. It would be great if someone was like, Nick, this is like categorically an app view, so call it that. But I've seen a lot of conflicting opinions on the internet, shocker. So I don't really know.
Anyone else want to weigh in briefly before we consume this amazing slide? Let's move on.
All right,
Amazing.
great.
Thanks, Nick.
So this is
I do
what
actually have another question on the previous slide. Like, why do you skip actually the relay? Like, it seems not to be part of the infrastructure at all.
because for the sake of development, so the intake takes multiple forms, right? It is
Right.
possible for Smoke Signal to consume from the Firehose, but I don't do that. I just connect directly to PDSs and subscribe to stuff. There's sort of like a larger picture here, which is as things were evolving and as I was learning about app protocol, a bit ago and then started development a couple months ago, I actually wasn't entirely sure if I was going to implement or support the concept of a smoke signal or event specific relay system. So having like a sort of a separate fire hose or something else that was specific to the event or related data. So at some point that it might, but for the most part, I can subscribe to repositories for the users that have created accounts or signed into it. And yeah, just connect directly to the PDSs, and I don't really need to do anything else. Yeah, cool. So on that note, this is what a data structure looks like. Any app that has private keys in app, yeah. Feel free to unmute and interrupt, because sometimes I don't actually see all the text from the Zoom chats, just FYI. Also, there's a very excited group of people a couple offices down. They're not like y'all can't hear them, right?
Audio all good?
Yeah,
Excellent.
you're good.
Fantastic. Ooh, they are, whatever they're doing, they're really enjoying life. Excellent. Okay, yeah, so a record is relatively straightforward. There's a name, like an event name, text. There's some timestamps when the event was created, when it starts and ends, and then this type record. And I'll get more into types later. I'm using mode and status to represent, those are just terms. Those are hard-coded types of things. A lot of this, if you are aware of what schema.org looks like, a lot of this is meant to look close to it, because I really don't want to reinvent the wheel. I just want to make something useful. And I'm strongly of the opinion that perfect is the enemy of good. If you hit it next. An RSVP is also minimal. There is an RSVP status, and those are also terms: going, not going, interested, and then a strong reference to an event. I chose a strong reference here because someone could, in this distributed landscape, RSVP going to an event, and then the event could change, and then I want people to be able to point back and say, no, I was going to the event when it said this. Now it says this other thing, and like that was after I said yes. And having a strong reference, although I don't know if that's like a super common or practical use case, it allows us to do so relatively easily. On it next. Cool. So let's take a step back, right? Lexicons and stuff are all fun and good, but smoke signal itself is actually the answer to a question. And like, I think that this is an important one to talk about in the context of anything that is, people. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's important for anything to claim to be a social utility or sort of public good application. Like, and the question is, and if you could hit next, how can communities outlive the platforms they use? And this question is sort of central to a lot of what I think Blue Sky Social and App Protocol exists to be, and that is a thing that is allowing people to have data ownership and portability of their own stuff, so they can retain a semblance of control, regardless of if smoke signal events eventually goes away, or if it's replaced, or if it evolves into something that they don't like, right? When communities, especially communities that run events and directly interact with other people, because that's what communities are, right? They're congregations. When they invest time, effort, and energy into their people, their events, and their content, they should be able to own that content and do whatever they want with it, and then move it if they need to. I blogged about this pretty extensively. If you could hit next. I blogged about this pretty extensively in this post called Why App Protocol, and I don't really want to talk about why I chose App Protocol versus other protocols, but I really want to focus on what the core benefit here and the strength that I'm focusing on gives. And really, it's that concept of decentralization, data portability, and lexicons. Right now, with minimal dependencies and direct ownership of content, in theory, someone could say, hey, I'm going to spin up a PLC or use something else that exists in some air-gapped network or exists within a college, right? And because the application interacts directly with PDSs, they could do that and function and exist and operate without having to be a part of some sort of other website or suite of services, et cetera. And that, I think, is really powerful. When you have things like data portability and you have flexible lexicons that can evolve and adapt to the need at the time, we change the way that people think about data discovery, right? We change the way that we think about data migration and content migration over networks. Data ownership becomes a real and actual thing, and not just a buzzword that we see on TechCrunch every now and then. And of course, new content types, I think, are pivotal to the longevity of the platform. And I have some hot takes about that in the future. So App Protocol, I think, is a really good piece, a critical and central piece, if I can say, to building something like this. Next. Cool. So how did we get here, right? Moving fast and breaking things. It's a lot of fun. We've had 60 releases. First went public on July 14th. Technically, I finished, I was feature complete of the MVP on July 12th, and then I didn't publish it for a couple of days because I was having a whiskey and man, do I really want to make something and then commit, my time and energy to it? And ultimately I decided yes. So, sleep on big things was sort of the idea. There was 32 updates in July, 32 updates in August. That's just coincidental. There's not a cadence or anything really. In July, we had calendars go out. So Smoke Signal supports ICS and subscriptions, so you can take any individual handle or your own and throw it in Google Calendar, Proton Calendar, whatever you use, iCal, and then see all of the events that you have either created or RSVP'd to. And that's just a sort of a duh feature. Let's get the information out of the network and out of the application into the hands of the users so they can use their own tools to do whatever they want with it, OAuth, I did not expect OAuth to come out so quickly. I wasn't in the original roadmap for Q3 of this year, so I wasn't planning on doing it. But I thought to myself, oh man, this is going to make it a lot easier for people to just start using the app if they don't have to go out of their way to create an app password. And I was explaining how to use Smoke Signal to some of my non-technical friends, and they were like, I have to do what? And it was a no-brainer. Also started the badge proof of concept. I'll get to that in a little bit. And then the project itself at this point, I think when I did an SCC on it, it's like 18,000 lines of Rust. So it's not small, but it's also not like crazy huge. Next. The roadmap has a lot of things in it. I'm pretty committed right now to finishing internationalization and localization. I don't speak many other languages. I don't speak English very well. So I'm figuring out how to actually localize some of the content. But with the recent badge stuff, I did figure out my approach to localizing errors and other sort of application deep nested data structures that have to like bubble up in such a way that they can be localized and translatable. Labeler integration, I think is going to be huge. If I could create a labeler that said, hey, this is going to label events that are swing dance events, and then I could use that information to discriminate against West Coast swing because Lindy Hop is the only swing dancing, and that would be fantastic for me, and I would use that, you know. Lexicon integration and clients is another thing. I'm looking at some of the other libraries and clients out there and figuring out how to add the actual smoke signal lexicon to them. And then multi-region deployments, like going from 0 to 1, I think it opens up and exposes a lot of really hard problems. I want to be able to run a smoke signal cluster in US East, US West, and EU. I don't know, maybe Great Britain or someplace, or South America, who knows? And have all of them operate independently, right? I want to rely on the fact that all of these systems, and this one may be where the Firehose comes in, they can subscribe to streams of events, synchronize, and then rely on things like regional pinning to keep users local to where they are, but then use the sort of more broad network to eventually replicate things to other locations. I think that'd be really fun. And if I could find a way to cheaply do that, then we could figure out how to do like edge services on top of that protocol, which I think is another set of interesting conversations and possibilities. More specific to events.
Sorry. Lawrence had a question. Go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah. You kind of went quickly over it, but when you said about lexicon integration in clients, like do you feel like that part is on you, or is that like advocacy of like bothering other people, or like how's it actually going? What's the responses like? How difficult is this to do? Like, can you tell more?
Yeah, so I think with the rate of evolution and change in the current app protocol ecosystem, and just sort of show other developers that like I've got skin in the game, I think it's just a practical consideration to say, hey, I'm going to open a PR that introduces the smoke signal lexicon, and then, you know, either make some amount of commitment to maintaining it, or figure out a way to hand off ownership of that within the library. But I want to make it easier for other developers to start using it. So it's more of a gesture, I guess, in my mind right now. I would love for other developers to go, hot damn, Nick, smoke signal is so cool. I want that in my SDK. But so far that hasn't manifested yet. So I'm just looking to sort of plant the seed at this point.
I had a really good discussion with the developer of Oranos. He's local here to Vancouver, and he's got a very nice looking web front end. And I'm scheming with him about using it as a test bed, because you can, you know, kind of like Fanfi in Mastodon world, it's client only, which both constrains you to that kind of like serverless stuff, ideally, and secondarily, ideally for design and integration, can iterate a lot faster than having to work with the beast that is all of React Native. So I think a lot of that stuff is just going to be us all in the atmosphere experimenting together.
Yeah, totally. So so recurring events and scheduling. Events and communities usually create recurring things. I'm involved in a swing dance group in Dayton, Ohio, Gem City Swing, and we have events every Tuesday, right? Tuesday evenings are our thing. So being able to like schedule them out or have them re-events, that's funny. have them recur in some sort of organized and meaningful way. I guess easy is the real kicker there. There's some really good data structures, especially on schema.org, that help describe things. And fortunately, calendars are not, I'm not inventing those. A lot of calendars and UIs exist that support things like, repeat every third Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every other week, yada, yada, yada. I just need to find the best way to represent that in the UI and then also represent that in a data structure that we can then implement and make useful in the app. And also figuring out how that exists within the lexicon. I've thought about doing something like event templates or repeating events that are stored publicly, like as records. That could be fun. Okay, cool. And then proofs. And if you hit next, I'm going to go to the fun list. Okay, great. So here are a bunch of half-baked ideas. I don't know where any of this is going to go, but it's stuff that I'm thinking about and I think it's going to be really cool. Event spans, right? These are those multi-day events. So the idea is that you have, Friday through Sunday. You may have events that happen very specifically within schedules, or you may have things like fringe events, like, hey, there's an unofficial but related like pub crawl or something for a conference on the Friday before, the Thursday before, or things like that. Yeah. I was going to put some sort of snarky slide in there of that video. Like that's actually already done. I just haven't exposed it in the app yet, but no. Ticketing is a really interesting concept. Was it difficult or long to support OAuth? No, it took about a weekend. With that said, back when I worked at Blizzard, I pushed for OAuth functionality and was the DRI for that. And then when I worked at Mattel, I led the organization and group that did all of the COPPA, GDPR, OAuth functionality for Mattel. So like Hot Wheels apps, Fisher Price apps, Family Dynamics, all that fun stuff. So I'm very comfortable with OAuth and I'm very familiar with the spec. So it felt relatively straightforward to me, but I know that there's a lot of yeah, that's accurate. I feel like there's a lot of context that I'm fortunate to have when saying that. Yeah. Okay. Ticketing is pretty cool. It'd be really cool if you could have some sort of proof or some sort of signed thing, perhaps something that's generated every 60 seconds with a flooring 60-second timestamp. That's a QR code that you could say, hey, I am this person and this is the proof that I have this ticket. Automation, being able to like auto approve or auto accept or create events that are recurring. So like, create for a recurring event that happens every Tuesday, create at most 3 at a time. And then, as time progresses and moves forward, the next one is created when to keep up that list of future events. Wait lists are really interesting. Being able to say there's like 20 slots, anyone who RSVPs after that is put in a waitlist bucket, or to have different tiers of groups, which could be interesting. Delegation and multi-organizer features. I have no idea where that's going to look like, but I'm super excited about that because I think that delegation and permissions are going to be critical to actually enabling real community functionality and shared state, which is like, I think at the core of what community content, like communal content, actually exists as. Media, blobs. I've been really hesitant to jump into blobs and start with that. It seems like a no-brainer to add like thumbnail images, speaker image, presenter, organizer images, headers, footers, etc. But I'm starting with the basics, which is like, text. And I'm gonna spend some time in the future figuring out where the role of media exists in this space, because it also adds a lot of complexity. Yeah, notifications. I'm a big pushover fan, but that's not really user-friendly to a lot of people. So being able to have email or mobile push notifications for things like, hey, this person RSVP'd to your event, or this person created an event. Do you want to go look at it? Like that could be interesting. Everything else is pretty passive. Yeah. So I used to work in, I worked at Yahoo and worked at Mattel and other internet companies. Content moderation sucks. And I actually intentionally did not link, URLs recently up until somewhat recently, up until Boris was like, hey, this is like a basic thing and we should have it. Because I was like, oh, it's just another vector for spam. And that's kind of where my trauma is from working on internet things. So that's where my head was at. So I'll get over it and we'll make progress eventually. Yeah, application metrics and observability. Currently, it's all tied to Sentry, and I'm pushing some OTel stuff. Also, I'm running on a $10 VPS, so I don't really have a lot of like, you know, overhead and infrastructure to support like proper tracing or anything like that. We'll probably need to at some point. And then, of course, event analytics are a really interesting concept. I think it would be super cool, and this is again more Firehose integration, or perhaps a separate thing to be able to say, your event has 5 people interested and 10 people going, and then also it's had this many links and references, or it's the topic of conversation in this many posts, throughout the atmosphere. There, I said it once. That could be really useful. And if event organizers want to know, I'm going to get to that in a second. If event organizers want to know what their impact is, analytics in app protocol is going to be important. I just don't know what that looks like yet. Okay, next.
I'm going to pause here because this is huge. This is a ton of work. I have leaned heavily into Luma, and I'm still using Luma for these things. You're really not far from being able to displace a commercial platform like Luma.
I want to disrupt some things, not in like that douchebag Silicon Valley way, but like I really want to change the way that companies are forced to deal with user content, and there's no better way to then just beat them at their own game.
I think the huge thing for me really has been, even for free events, is one, the very, very simple RSVP, which is all that it should be. And two, my general thing is that unless you do calendar integration and you do the email follow-ups with everything that people need to know, that's what loses people. So it's notifications and like simple RSVP sign up, and you're pretty darn close to have everything that's needed. So I just want to pause and be like, Nick, thank you.
Yeah. We'll see. And I appreciate that. Yeah, okay, so first, we have this concept of record proofs. This was a research thing that came up somewhat recently, and record proofs are important for a couple of reasons. Can you go to the next slide? So the question that I'm trying to answer here is, how can handles attest to the authenticity of records they don't own, right? If I am going, so I can say, hey, I have the intent of going to an event, but unless the organizer says, oh yeah, I approve of it, then it's just an open and empty claim, So there has to be some sort of mechanism to allow attestation and verification of claims, right? Both in the broad sense and in the specific sense, like event record sense. So I think that's what Blue Badge is meant to be. So if you click next. Hooray, an experiment in record proofs. So this is live, it's up there, go fiddle with it. The site is extremely basic. This is what it looks like. You go to it. Again, if you haven't noticed, my interfaces are really simple, and thank God for CSS frameworks. But right there in that form, right there at the top of the page, there's this form, and that's where you can drop in an @URI. And then when you click that, next page, what happens is Blue Badge is going to fetch that URI from the PDS. It's going to look at that concept, and then it's going to validate it, right? That's really important. If you could have a way of having distributed records where people own the records that they care about, like their badges or achievements, and still retain a way to have an issuer say, yeah, I approve that this person has this thing, I think that's going to be really, there's a lot of possibilities there. If you could hit next. So Blue Badge does 2 things, right? it's a lexicon for a badge definition, and this is what a badge looks like. It has a name, it has text, and it has a type. Lo and behold, I've tried making everything as normal as possible with having that plain text field. And this one, for the proof of concept website at proto.camp, this badge is awarded when you've logged into it for the first time. So hit next. This is an award. So you have this concept of the badge definition, and then you have an award. An award record is that issuance, that combination of a DID, like a handle, being granted or awarded a badge, in this case with the badge structure, and then a proof existing from the issuer, right? So, yeah, I know. I know that there's a lot of this is a proof of concept. It's early. This is really a discussion driver. I just wanted to put something out there and show and demonstrate how this could operate. I've got so many. I think there's so much potential. Oh, that's fine. Okay, so the badge itself, it's a strong reference with some optional fields, name, description, etc. It's this DID record, and the DID is important because if you didn't have the DID, then anyone could just copy a badge record. I'm sorry, an award record from another PDS and copy it to themselves. But this DID is sort of the additional sort of nonce and proof that it's pertaining to a specific subject. And then proof, where K is a reference, a URI to a key. In this case, it's an HTTP, an SSL, like a secure URL to JSON web keys. But, and this is another hot take, it could also be a verifiable content key, or it could be a key that's used in a DID, right? Because a DID is just a URL. So at the end of the day, key is just a thing that resolves to something that can be used to validate the signature, and the signature is the payload based on whatever the key presents. In this case, ECDSA P256 signature of some sort. So hit next. Yeah, verifiable. Yeah, we can get there. Yeah, so what does this mean? So at ProtoCamp can define the badge eventual awaits, and Jared Keenest earns the badge. So at ProtoCamp awards it, and that awarding is exists by at ProtoCamp writing a record to the Jared Keenest PDS, and then using Blue Badge or whatever. I implemented SVG and PNG embeds so you can easily render them on websites. I can show off, and there's cryptographic proof that it's valid. Hit next. So this applies to Smoke Signal for a bunch of reasons, right? If at ProtoCamp, for example, had a summer concert series with 10 seats, and Jared Keenest RSVPs and pays for a seat, then at ProtoCamp could have a signed record saying, hey, Jared Keenest is RSVP'd and it was accepted. Oh God, no. Accepted, and they were marked as paid. So then I could say, I know, it's fine. This is a safe space. I can say and have proof that I went to the concert, or if issuance and ticketing was part of this, then yeah, exactly. Then there could be this like a way, this sort of additional context that's verifiable for RSVPs or other data structures as it exists. So hit next. There's so many possibilities and details to figure out, and I'm a smart guy. Like, got no issue saying that. A lot of pride, no ego. But I also definitely don't want to make all these decisions in a bubble, because I'm sure that there's so many more use cases and experiences and concepts that I am unaware of. And a lot of this builds on very, solid existing things. Some things that might be overly complicated, but, put that on pause for a bit. Verifiable credentials is a part of the DID core data model. It's super DID, love it. Verification methods, that's the actual data structure that can exist within DIDs. So if we expanded the DID spec within PLC, et cetera, to support additional user managed keys for the purpose of verifying, or for the purpose of managing these credentials, for the purpose of managing the credentials used for these claims, that would be super cool. And then, then there's a whole bunch of really complicated things that need to be worked out, like revocation, expiration, delegation. What if there's an intermediary issuer that is allowed by a parent issuer? Man, UCANs would be pretty useful for that. if there's a concept of expiration, this thing, like an SSL certificate or other PKI concepts, it's only, the signature is only valid after a certain date and before a certain date. And then of course the concept of sister record, or sibling records. So there could be a record on the issuer PDS that says, hey, I'm proof that this thing is still valid. If time or just the fact that it's written into the ether in public isn't enough, a sibling record could exist that if it goes away or the signature there is revoked, then the badge or signed proof is no longer valid. Other things work out. Yeah. So there was some chatter. Questions? Anyone have stuff they want to talk about with this so far?
Where's the ZK snarks? For those people who are watching this video after the fact, Nick is reading chat in real time, so some of his explications, you can match the chat log later. We will not issue the cursed phrase here on video.
Oh yeah. Not at all. Okay, next. Cool. Blue Badge is open source. Smoke Signal and @protocamp are not open source, possibly yet. Honestly, I don't know what I'm doing there, so I could be convinced, or I might not. Honestly, I don't actually know, and this is a separate and related conversation. I don't really know what the best thing for this platform is at this point. If it's to push and have the concept of having non-open source things be viable, or if it's to just have more stuff out there that other people can use and build off of. I don't know. I'm just making the shit up as I go along. Next. Cool. Now I have some discussion topics. These are things that I think about a lot. How can I provide a lexicon that is descriptive and or authoritative? Should lexicons be records with AT URIs? Next. Here is an event, right? 1 year anniversary of Smoke Signal. It's super cool. There's that $type events.smokesignal.calendar.event. That's useless information to something consuming the Firehose that has never consumed a Smoke Signal event before. It's useful for clients that know that type or things that have using it, but at the same time, it doesn't lead to anything, and that is an issue. Hit next. What if that type was a URI? An @URI, because it's really just a differently resolved URL of, the HTTPS URL, right? Or an HTTPS URL itself. What if that pointed to this magical lexicon definition, this hard-coded thing, com.@proto.lexicon.definition, and that record was the authoritative information about how to identify that type? Hit next. So this means that yes, like it is turtles all the way down, but at some point there has to be a thing. In this case, the type com@protocol lexicon definition, the lexicon library, that has the JSON schema thing. Ooh, I agree with that, but I don't know if we have a really good. Okay, sorry for this is important context. Should that URI be a strong reference? I'm actually not entirely sure. I am of the opinion that perhaps AT URIs should, important ones, there should be a conforming optional standard where you are creating an R key in advance that's like an FMV hash or something of the content. And that's actually what I'm doing for badge signatures. So like a signature looks at the IPLD data structure, the binary JSON representation, sorted and organized as the spec defines, and then uses the bytes of that minus the proof to pipe into the signing mechanism. I kind of think we should be doing the same thing there with records that are important, that we consider permanent. Thus, it's effectively content addressable storage, and there's no way of changing the content without changing the URI, and that might not be a bad convention. With that said, the end result is that there is a lexicon that defines this core data structure that is essential to every operation of the ecosystem, and then you can reference it as a URL or URI, and it improves the discovery of them. Okay. Questions?
Not a question, but a comment.
Yeah.
Maybe
Go
Paul
ahead,
can say the same.
Brian.
As a hack, instead of like making it a URI, you can say like, oh, combat proto lexicon definition, or where are we? Like events.smokesignal.calendar.event.main. Smokesignal.events. I wonder if that is a handle, and look up the handle, and then then use the NSID as the.
Isn't that a web did though?
No, well, you could do it as a web did, or you could do it as it could just use the handle system, right? Which could then be DNS. Otherwise, you have to set up a well-known on like smoke signal events, which you might not want to do. You might want to just have a DNS record.
So that's I love that you brought that up. I really like the idea of well-knowns being used. Because at the end of the day, everything is a URL, and if it makes me easier for me to guess what the URL is, that's good. But it seems not contradictory, maybe complementary, but differently. Like an @URI is going to become a URL in a different form. It's just conforming and scoped, right? It eliminates a lot of room for interpretation as to what that URL should be. So I like the idea of permanence existing, because an authority that might not have a website, like I hate to use this phrase, like a design committee, could have a central DID used for publishing specs that are lexicons that exists. That the signing key or any sort of proof mechanism might be a part of the DID itself and not a website. And like, how can we support them if they did that? You know what I mean? So I think there's some like thought experiments that could help figure out a good way to do this. Also, sort of going back, and I think you'll agree, I want to do something that works and that is easy for developers to use. And I don't want people to have to go through a billion hoops. And that's why for badge proofs, it's JSON web keys that you fetch and then apply to a record. I would love to keep it as simple as possible there. So yeah, I'm all for it. I just like the idea of it being some source that you can go to in some way to understand what a record is or what a record trait is. Which
I'll let
different thing.
Paul go in a sec, but there's like we do a lot of like unbundling of things, like things that would normally be together, try to like separate the concerns. And one around lexicons is like there's a concept of like authority of like who's kind of like defining this and kind of controlling it, which can be a collective, it could be anything, it doesn't have to be a company or a person, but there's like some kind of like the idea of there being some kind of somewhat informal authority and we're all talking about the same kind of thing, and having some human naming there is kind of nice, like being able to read these NSIDs that kind of like make sense. Agreed. And that in that direction, at least to me, pushes towards something like DNS or something towards like a namespace, because you want to have some authority of the namespace. But then there's the separate concern, which is like archiving this and having access to it and letting the community look at all these things, which is like looking at the content. So if the authority can be like, you need the kind of the authority thing, and then you kind of need the like collective, like shared resource, which is like the compendium of all the lexicons, a meta lexicon.
Yeah. All right. Next slide. I'm gonna. Oh, sorry, Paul.
Paul. Oh, but
if you don't mind, I just want to. Go ahead, Boris.
I was just gonna say I'm just moving the slide so we're not staring at your eyes. But go ahead, Paul.
I just wanted to give a little bit more clarity or offer some other things to think about. So what Brian said, I definitely wanted to say, which is the NSID, those reverse domain IDs, the resolution can be defined in multiple different ways. The idea, for instance, that you had of the permanent records that you don't in place edit, but every time there's a version of it, you're choosing a different key for it, is totally doable within the dynamic mapping. You just have to figure out how that gets established. I think it's important to point out that the NSIDs are syntactically pretty tightly constrained. It's sort of important that they are used throughout. for instance, they're used regularly in the paths of records. And so you have to be really careful about what syntax gets in there. So that's like a constraint that works its way in like really strongly into things. So you gotta have to bear that in mind. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is that once we do move lexicon declarations into records, then the sort of interesting thing that you could start to do is have app views whose job is to aggregate them, and act like giant CDNs, and can kind of give a traditional package manager experience, which is, nice CLI, you do an OAuth flow, works just like, any other app, and, writes to the PDS that controls these records, which is also sort of why I agree with Brian. I'm a little inclined to use the handle system that currently exists so that it just like works with the existing software. But the really nice thing about the app view part of that dynamic is that it can help with some of the sort of like longevity questions that come into play with the data that's getting self-hosted. Because if I spin up, like say we set up the badge.blue repo containing the lexicons, and then a year or two passes and I forget to refresh, to keep my register, or I don't want to keep paying for it or whatever. At minimum, these package managers, these lexicon package managers, can like still kind of like, okay, well, we know that that's what the deal was. They can kind of have an archival intermediary governance to help smooth over some of the, problems that come with the decentralized, publishing. So that's something else to think about. And you can actually smooth over quite a number of the difficult questions through that kind of protocol.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think those are really good points. It's funny, through developing all of this, like I'm familiar with, did DHT and some of the others. DNS is so ingrained as a technology in everything we do. I think it's completely practical to support it long term. I also agree with the idea that if you if a domain does expire, right, or something else happens, having that did PLC under reference really solidifies the permanence of it much more than a web did can, so I think there's some pros and cons on both. Anyway, okay, moving on to the next interesting idea, which is I did a big, actually related to the NSID stuff. I did a big reset in Smoke Signal back in July, updated and improved the lexicon to be more normal, changed the formatting of things, so got rid of the renamed description to text, started using attributes in same camel cases, the formal lexicon or the official lexicon. And it got me thinking, like what if a feed did just display a smoke signal event? If it has a created at in text field, would that be enough? And the answer is technically no. They do a little bit of jiggling to make sure that they're only displaying posts and content, and they're using like view records and view content. Oh, cheers, sir. What is this concept of a trait? Could we say anything is like simply viewable, right? A viewable content, if it has like a minimum number of attributes, and what does that look like in the ad protocol ecosystem and world? I think this would be really interesting and useful, and it would also allow us to have things like, hey, this is something that can be RSVP'd to. This is something that can be liked, etc. And when we have those traits, it allows us to do more generic and simplified interactions, which kind of leads to the next one. Can you hit next? Cool. What is our shared taxonomy of content interactions? So like right now we've got, app bsky feed like, and then feed repost, but do those apply to anything? Should they be? Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, inherit and lexicons implement others or inherit from others. That's I think a really interesting concept, and I'd love to expand and talk about the concept of mixins, being able to say this is a core thing. It has a created at in text, right? It implements that interface, and then also it has start and ends, right? Which means that it is a spannable timed event, or it's a signed one because it has the proof structure added as well. All of those I think are fascinating. But if we have this concept of like, a general interaction, right, or a general share, does that lend itself to the expansion of the lexicon and supporting additional things? If something is shareable, right, or has a shareable trait, or has a likable trait or stampable trait, could we do that? Like, is that a direction that the overall environment needs to like start moving toward? I think front page is an awesome application so far. And I think it opens up a lot of really interesting discussions of like, what is a threaded discussion and how is that different from a post? What is the likability of a response in that world, or sharing of a handle or a group of threads, like not a subreddit, but or like a discussion board or something. Like, how does that work in the current interaction ecosystem? I don't really think there's a good answer for that yet. Cool. Next slide. Nice. Related, how can relay subscribers consume events and validate their authenticity? Right now, there's a lot of trust, right? If we set up, or if there was a relay that was created that was like a regional replica down in Brazil, right, to help offload regional load or data distribution, there's just an implicit trust. There's just this assumption that that relay is not going to do any injection of stuff that shouldn't be there. And that's, I think, a good and healthy assumption, but also there's really no way to verify it. So like, the trust is there, but the verify isn't, and that's a problem. There's no way of having signed content in its current form that doesn't require additional fetching of content. So, the reason the Firehose exists in its way, from my understanding, is that it makes it easier for people to see stuff and an entire payload of a record and then do things with it immediately, right? It's not just a big old stream of @URIs that you then have to fetch and do stuff with. So because we're taking that like additional step out of the mix, we're neglecting the verification component of making life easier for integrators. And I think that's something that needs to be explored and looked at further.
Could I chat on that one?
Oh yeah, sure.
The current Firehose is designed to be verifiable. You do have to do identity lookups, so you need to like look up the DID document, but it's shipping like a whole, this is actually like a problem that it's shipping so much information that almost no one is doing anything with. So as some context, the API for the relay, which is this big aggregator, is the exact same API as the PDS. Like the PDS outputs its own little Firehose of all the accounts in the PDS, and the relay basically just aggregates from many PDSs and puts out a unified one. And there's a huge amount of overhead. So right now the PDS, the relay outputs for repository operations, like a change, like you wrote some records in your repo, it outputs the commit, which is like a signed object signed with the account's key, which is declared in their DID. So you need to have a recent copy of the DID with the recent copy of the key to verify those signatures. There's a little bit of metadata in every commit, which you're kind of trusting the authority there is kind of the user or the user's PDS for creating the commit. And it has a rev, so you can check that this isn't like an old replayed commit. If you've seen a more recent commit and you get an old commit coming over the line, you know something's gone wrong and you should ignore it. If you see an invalid signature, you know probably, hopefully, your identity cache is just out of date and you need to go refresh your identity cache. But if you still see it's a bad commit, then you know something's really wrong and you shouldn't pass it through or should ignore it. It includes the whole Merkle tree of the new records. There's like one or two very subtle cases around the fact that a commit could include a deletion of a record by omitting it from the Merkle tree, but not indicate that in the list of ops. There's a list of ops that comes along with the Merkle, the little, anyways, I don't want to go like way too off on the deep end here, but basically you can get pretty close. It's like it's quite verifiable and it's pretty close. There's a couple little annoying things where maybe you needed a whole copy of the repo before the commit to really verify that the commit is at exactly like correct commit on the previous thing. And then there's these cases like, what if you just re-imported the whole thing, or you created like 1 million records all at once and it's too big to go over then we put this flag too big that it's like, okay, we give up, the Firehose isn't going to work for this one, you're going to have to go do some out of band thing. But in general, 99.9% of the time, it's verifiable. It's mostly verifiable. And we'd like, actually be great if we could make it, like if we could tweak it a little bit and do some computer science and actually truly make it verifiable without this caveat and this asterisk of this like deletion thing. Anyways, we're actually very under a lot of pressure to make a not verifiable version of the Firehose, because it would be literally insanely like 1/10 of the bandwidth, even if we did nothing else but throw out all the verification stuff. Almost all of the data on the Firehose is these Merkle proof tree intermediate nodes that no one is doing anything with.
I want to say that I've had 2 conversations recently where the relay is the most likely thing for a community to run because of the cost and complexity. I don't consider that to be a bad thing. So Drew's on the call. He's working with the University of Boulder in Colorado with Nathan Schneider. So thinking lots about shared ownership. And then when I was talking to Puria from Oranos, and we were thinking about the components, same thing. We're like, well, none of us really wants to pay $300 a month, but 10 people at 30, you just keep going, 100 at 3, that's actually pretty simple. So +1 for keeping it verifiable. But I totally understand the desire to have the like serverless version that potentially is directly consumable by a bunch of other things. So it's an interesting take.
Yeah, the current version is definitely not going away. The current version is definitely a litmus test. Like that going away would be a big problem, because it's a verifiable thing that lets you mirror the whole network. But it's like overkill for a lot of what people are doing. Some people have very strong opinions that everyone in the network should be verifying everything all the time. And it's a take. I think they're not wrong. I think it's like folks aren't doing it. I'm not sure we want to try to like go around with a billy club and like beat people because they're not verifying things. I don't think that's really our vibes. I want to say there's like this other end of the spectrum. So there's like a big demand path, like Front Page and other folks have been building their own like JSON WebSocket kind of thing that's maybe like filtered down to just the records of interest or like content of interest to them. You could also hydrate in. It could be more like the view stuff, right? You could add metadata, which then is not really verifiable, but it's like quite useful for devs. Like maybe you want to put the profile next to every post that comes over the feed, because then you don't need to do that kind of thing yourself. Now you have more trust, and maybe you want to have a real relationship with the people that you're consuming from, because you want to know that you actually trust them in the way that the relay is designed to be. Like you don't really need to trust the relay because it's all verifiable. So that's like one end of the design spectrum, is doing these like really application specific, nice ergonomic things that are designed to just like help devs get stuff done and have these like affordances built into them. And then there's the current one, which is this like, you're a protocol engineer, right? That's what you're trying to do here. And you care about this like cryptographic verifiability. Maybe there's a middle path we can do. If you could look, like Jazz has this Jetstream thing, which converts to JSON, and it's like much more efficient. And then you can filter on that. So people could run Jetstream instances that in Jetstream filtered to only the collections of interest or something like that. Anyways, sorry, it's really cool that you're doing the PDS only thing, because much of the ecosystem has been under strain this past week as we've had this insane growth of Firehose traffic. So it's like been it's like we thought we could put this off a little bit and maybe not, but also it's really cool that you found a way to like not get slammed in the middle of this all.
Hooray! All right, next slide. That's it. Hooray! Yeah. So smoke signal, it's super cool, if I can say so myself, and I'm really happy with how far it's come. I think it has a future and a potential in sort of the larger ad protocol ecosystem. So yeah, that's
round of applause. Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Just 18,000 lines of Rust between friends. That's great.
Yeah. Button for punishment.
Michael, go for it.
Yeah, very awesome stuff, Nick. I just have 2 questions. The first is there a way for a user to revoke the OAuth client application access? And second is, in the past year, how many times did you make breaking changes to your own internal lexicons?
Yeah, so we've just had the one, so I'll answer in reverse. Just had the one breaking change where I read and interpreted the lexicon spec incorrectly, and I was like, oh crap, gotta redo things. The good news, and this is kind of fun, the good news is that because the records already existed, writing a script to extract those records, transform them into the proper format to basically like upgrade and uplift them worked. So no data loss actually existed from the record replacement, which is, I think, kind of a fun side effect of that protocol. Sorry. I got a phone call and Zoom went funny. The other one, what was the other question? I'm so sorry.
Can users revoke the OAuth application access?
Yeah, I don't think that there's a way, I don't think that there's a user interface to revoking tokens or anything like that right now. So right now, the only way to do it would be to like log out of smoke signal. We delete in the spirit of keeping as little data as possible. Whenever anything expires, like a DPoP like secret or refresh tokens if they're consumed, I delete those records, which is one thing, but it's not really in the control of the user, which is unfortunate. It'd be great if there was an API interface to say, hey, these are the different client IDs that have authenticated, wipe all my sessions or something like that. I think there's some usability improvements that can occur with OAuth, but that's why it's early.
Very cool. Thanks.
Tom, go for it.
Hey, thanks, Nick. This has been great talk. I had a question about the idea about subscribing to PDSs directly. Yeah. That's an idea that I think we came up with when we were done our kind of Firehose consumer thing, and I was quite annoyed that we didn't come up with that or think of it earlier. Do you have any like constraints, like because you're kind of managing then maybe, I mean, I don't know how many users you have, but maybe hundreds or thousands of WebSockets in memory at once. Is there like, how far can that scale? And like, do you have any problems you had to overcome to do that?
Not that far. I think it would not scale that well, like just practically speaking. I think it's pretty good for if there was, for example, an isolated organization instance of smoke signal within a corporate network, and there was a handful of PDSs that existed, and you had an allow list or something to say, fetch from these, sync them, etc. I guess at that point, you'd also probably just run a relay to centralize that functionality. That would all be fine and good. I think subscribing to the Firehose is going to be the really like the long-term solution, especially with multi-region and like more complex deployments. Yeah, I think it's inevitable.
I think it's like a really nice on-ramp though. If you want to start developing to just build a new app, you don't have to use the relay. You can subscribe as you go to the users as they sign up to your application.
Yeah.
I'd say the other thing that comes to mind is, again, the user ownership thing, where if I imagine an org, so your swing dance org, onboarding people into a PDS where they get a default account that then does smoke signal and other stuff, that becomes a pattern, which is very different from, it's more instant based than I am a giant smoke signal platform with the benefit of of course, the shared lexicon. So there's something there, but it's not like fully baked yet.
Yeah, I try not to do this on the regular because it's a little mind numbing, but sometimes it's nice to think about the sort of corporate path of account management. What is a managed account? Like what would a managed DID look like for an organization? Would they want the ability to move a DID and have a separate revocation key, or have those sort of controls? Would they automatically populate DIDs, or push them to different services in some sort of controlled fashion? I think those are valid use cases that need to be explored.
Lauren, go ahead.
Yes. Hypothetical question. Like, let's say one of the current ActivityPub event planners want to say, like, hey, this is cool. We also want to go with AT Proto. Like, would you recommend, like, would you want them to use like the smoke signal lexicon? And let's say they think like, oh, this sort of works. We have some questions. Like, do you want to be in the position to negotiate with them of like, hey, should they add to this lexicon, or do you feel like, nah, maybe figure out your lexicon first and then we can talk about interoperability later? Like, how would you, do you have any thoughts about that process, how that would look like and what your preference would be for that?
Man, this is a hot take. I don't think that there's anything preventing us from having a lexicon that has a lexicon schema or a JSON LD schema. There's nothing preventing us from having a view of the smoke signal event record structure that could be composed and possibly translated into JSON LD for the purpose of extending an ActivityPub or activity streams service to use them. The big caveat to that, and I've contributed to Mastodon before. I'm in the little authors list or whatever. I don't like writing a lot of Ruby, and I'm not very good at it. So my commits are limited. But I think that there's just some fundamental differences in the inbox outbox approach that ActivityPub activity streams uses, and the portability aspect of user migration doesn't really lend itself to the protocol super well. So I think we would have to really figure out how non-permanence translates from app protocol to anything else, and I think that's kind of the biggest hurdle.
Awesome.
But yeah, I mean, I guess, I'm sorry, that was a crap answer. Yeah, honestly, use what works. I think that if there was a tool that converted or allowed these events to be conforming to the activity streams event concept, I think it would be a great idea. At the end of the day, I want communities to exist, and if there's a way to migrate, manage, or reference the information, man, give communities as much exposure as they need to thrive.
And I think maybe because this came up earlier again, is we don't really know how lexicons are going to compose or how people are going to manage them. Like, we're just barely at the point of like making a GitHub page listing the 6 lexicons in the wild. That's a wild ass guess. I don't even know if there's 6. Right.
Yeah, actually, the kind of my question was more in that direction of like, do you want to be a person that manages lexicons, or do you feel like, hey, I'm more of a like, I'm an event plan, like I design the rest of the software. I'm less interested in like the lexicon stuff. I'm sort of interested in like, do you see actually, does it even make sense for me to make a separation between those two things? Because I'm not really clear if it makes sense.
Yeah, I think the number one design goal of Smoke Signal is to provide a stable lexicon. So if Smoke Signal went away, it could be used regardless of the application framework that's using the lexicon. So I think it's going to be important. There's this whole world of governance that can and should be involved. I don't even know where to tap into that. I would humbly defer to Brian and others to lead that direction, or to lead that conversation, or at least drive the conversation amongst people to figure out how to best self-organize and say, hey, we want events to look like this using the Smoke Signal NSID, and this is what it should or should not have. And at some point there has to be a tiebreaker and stuff, and that's why governance have like committee rules to help and facilitate with that. But I think it needs to be I'd love to spread the ownership around.
As a kind of follow-on question to that, or like a related one, if someone had gone already and turned schema.org into lexicons, or had turned the ICS file format into, would you have just used that, or do you think would you have done like a wrapper around it maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of using I'm using schema.org inspired things. It's not complete and total, because schema.org is meant to be very optional and piecemeal. I really like protocol buffers approach to handling some things. It would be cool to have the lexicon support the concept of like reserved attributes or placeholder things to say, hey, this is no longer used, don't use it. I think there has to be some things figured out with how we're going to version them, like having lexicon records be unions, for example, so you can just add new versions to the union as the record itself changes. But yeah, I get probably not iCal, like the ICS format and bcard format. They're kind of difficult, and they're also implemented poorly. They're kind of like the DNS spec, right? So yeah, I'd say schema.org is probably the largest influence.
Yeah, we're 10:20. What I'd like to do now is once again thank Nick. That was amazing. Thank you so much. We did talk about community ownership. I feel like I oversold that, and in fact, we went deeper and more technically even than the front page talk. But that was super great. No, not bad at all. The one thing that I missed is that Nick, I'd like you actually, for the record, just to talk a little bit about what your past experience has been around. I know you've got blog posts on it, but basically, what other social and community event stuff have you been involved with in the past?
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate to work with some really smart people at some really smart organizations. Back in 2005, 2006, when Web 2.0 was like a thing and companies were being gobbled up, I was working at Yahoo on Delicious. Yeah, right. Delicious, what I consider a prime example of a social utility. It did one thing really well, which is to allow you to manage your bookmarks and references. That was fantastic, right? People were having multiple devices, and that was like a new thing. People were figuring out how to like have their work music playlist and their home music playlist, and like the different tools and things that could exist to support that. And we were also expanding the functionality of what was the known social web in some pretty big ways. We were having more people online that were able and willing to communicate across many more topics. The amount of information in community expanded, like it exploded greatly. It was more than just meetups and chat rooms, right? There was like so much more information available to consume at any point. So things like Delicious and Flickr and upcoming.org, Yahoo Answers, they were creating these knowledge banks, right? These taxonomies and folksonomies to allow people to make sense out of this huge amount of information. So that's why tagging was such a big thing, categories, location-based organization for events and whatnot. So with that, and with the expansion of friend feed and Facebook and these other things, people started having more aggregated and scoped information flowing. They were using these tools for very specific purposes, and then companies realized how much money they could make by keeping users into their respective websites and applications. Everything came down to dollars and ad clicks. So when upcoming.org was purchased, Andy, he's actually on, he runs did XOXO recently. He's on Blue Sky, which is fantastic. Upcoming sort of changed hand a couple times, and there was this big push to bring it back and online again. There was a Kickstarter, like there's some crowdfunding for it, and there was a lot of attention and momentum or energy and interest in providing the archives of past events, because these communities that put this energy and money into existing and like their people, they wanted to be able to like look back, and nostalgia is real, right? You want to look back and go, hey, I remember that. Do you remember that? Let's connect with Boris. I haven't seen him in ages, right? So that was there, and I think that crowdfunding effort was sort of demonstrative of the interest of creating things that were owned by the people themselves, that the communities had a stronger sense of ownership and were missing out on that data ownership and portability. So when you look at things like Facebook events, meetup.com, upcoming.org, I think these are all different but related examples of this concept of communities needing to have ownership of their data, regardless of the longevity of the specific website or platform that they use. And for communities at Wyatt protocol, et cetera. Those are me trying to pen and represent that, like distill that concept. But I think that's what it really comes down to.
Amazing. We will turn the recording off and leave it there. Thank you so much, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you all for having me. This was